In 1724, the single most responsible thing a London mother could do for her infant child was pour ale into its bottle. Not as a treat, not by accident, not in ignorance, as medicine, as the only available alternative to something that would kill it. Sit with that for a second. A good mother, in the greatest city on earth, in a year when Handel is composing and Newton has only just died, and the English are genuinely convinced they're building the most advanced civilization in human history. That mother's best available tool for keeping her baby alive is a diluted alcoholic beverage. Because the water is worse. Not worse like tap water that tastes of chlorine. Worse like, there are streets in London in 1724 where 1 in 3 children born will be dead before their 5th birthday, and the water is a significant reason why. Worse like, the Thames, the river, the great artery, the thing poets write about and painters paint and boatmen have worked for centuries is so comprehensively contaminated by everything the city produces and deposits that drinking it untreated is a game of biological Russian roulette that the Thames wins more often than you'd expect. And here is the thing that makes this impossible to shake once you've understood it. Nobody knows why. The invisible thing that lives in the well water and the pump water and the slow brown river, the thing that will spend 3 weeks emptying your intestines and then sometimes kill you, has no name yet, has no discoverer, has no theory attached to it that is correct. The best scientific minds of 1724 believe disease comes from bad air, from the smell of rotting matter, miasma, the exhalation of putrefaction. They are wrong about the mechanism, they are right about the location. The bad smell and the contaminated water live in exactly the same places. The cesspool, the blocked drain, the well 17 feet from a leaking sewer. And so the practical advice of stay away from places that stink works better than it has any right to, even though the reasoning behind it is completely incorrect. But stay away from places that stink doesn't help you when you're thirsty, and you are always thirsty. You're always thirsty in London because London in 1724 is a city of 500,000 people engaged in hard physical labour in all weathers, and hard physical labour produces thirst, and thirst requires liquid, and the liquid that is cheapest and most available. The water from the pump at the end of the street, the water from the well in the yard, the water you can see and reach and draw for free right now, is the water that might kill you. So they brew instead. Millions of gallons of ale and small beer every year in thousands of brewhouses across the city. The ale that working men carry to their jobs in clay jugs. The small beer that children drink at breakfast because the alternative is the pump. The porter that's being invented right now in this exact decade, heavy and dark, brewed to a strength that will last the workday. And the process of brewing, the heating of the water, the boiling of the wort, kills whatever invisible thing is trying to kill them. Not because anyone designed it that way, not because any brewer in London in 1724 has the faintest idea that he is a public health infrastructure. He's just making ale. He's just doing what his father taught him and his master before that. He's just following a process that produces a product people will pay for. The life-saving part is an accident of good brewing. That is the whole story. That is why I can't stop thinking about it. Add a city where the richest people buy clean water delivered by women who walk 40-minute circuits with wooden tubs balanced on a yoke across their shoulders. Where the middle classes subscribe to a private water company that channels spring water down an artificial river from Hertfordshire. Where the poor use the street pump. Where the Gap between those three options is the gap between surviving summer and not. Add gin. Because when water kills you and ale costs money, gin is a penny, and a penny buys you out of the sensation of thirst immediately, and the damage gin does takes 10 years, and the damage water does takes 10 days. That's London, in the year 1724, the most brilliant city in the world, building the architecture of empire, producing ideas that will shape the next 3 centuries, and quietly, continuously, invisibly being killed by the thing it is most built around. The river, the wells, the water. We're going there tonight, not to watch a hanging, not to calculate profit margins, not to stare at cathedrals. We're going to follow the water, from the clean source to the contaminated one, from the brew house to the pump, from the delivery to the death. One day, one person, everything they drank and didn't drink, and why the difference mattered more than anything else about where they lived. I make these history sleep stories, and I genuinely cannot tell if you're listening because history soothes you or because some part of your brain refuses to rest until it understands how a city of 500,000 people solved the problem of water by collectively agreeing to be gently drunk from 6 in the morning until they went to bed. Either way, both are valid. Neither requires you to defend yourself to me. Get comfortable. The brew house is warm, the mash is working. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, half a second, maybe less. You've completely forgotten where you are. Then it hits you. Not a sound. Not the cold. Something warmer than either of those things. A presence more than a smell. Something alive and sweet pressing against the inside of your nose, filling the back of your throat with a weight that is almost pleasant. Yeast, malt, the heavy, bread-heavy exhalation of fermentation. You're in the loft above the brew house, and the mash has been working since last night. The smell is layered, if you pay attention to it. The top note is sweetness, the particular sweetness of grain and sugar in warm water, the smell of conversion happening. Underneath that, something earthier, something that reminds you of the barn in Taunton, where your father kept the animals. That particular warmth of living things in an enclosed space, breathing and working and producing heat in the dark. Underneath that, faint but constant, is the smell of the Thames, which is always there in London, underneath everything, like a bass note played so low you feel it more than hear it. And underneath all of that, underneath the yeast and the malt and the river and the ambient Londonness of everything, is the smell of the city itself. Coal smoke, night soil. 500,000 people live in pack too close together on an island that was never designed to contain them, including you. Welcome to Clerkenwell, London, November. The year 1724. You are Thomas Harker. You're 16 years old and you arrived in this city 8 months ago from Taunton, Somerset, with a letter of introduction tucked into your coat and a bundle of clothes that already felt inadequate before you'd walked from the coaching inn to your new master's house. Back home, your father told you London would make you or break you. He was right about both halves of that. You've just been here long enough to know which half is winning on any given day. The loft is small, carved out of the space above the copper, the big lead-lined brewing vessel, where the heat rises and keeps the room warmer than it has any right to be given that outside. November is conducting itself with particular aggression this year. Your pallet is straw, covered with a rough blanket that smells permanently of the brew house. Will Shepherd sleeps 3 feet away, face down, his dark hair the only visible part of him above the wool. He came from Worcestershire 2 years ago. He communicates his demonstrations more than explanations. showing you what to do with his hands while his mouth says something entirely different. You can hear through the wooden floorboards the slow bubble of the mash working. That's why you're awake, not the bells, though St. James's Clerkenwell will rattle the shutters when it gets going. And it is getting going somewhere around 5:30, the first deep roll of it vibrating through the building's old timbers. Not the street noise, which you've learned to hear without actually listening to the same way you once learned to sleep through your father's coughing. You're awake because you've learned, in 8 months, to hear the mash. When the bubbling is slow and regular, everything is working. When it speeds up, that rapid, anxious, irregular ticking, it means the temperature has gone wrong somewhere, and if you don't catch it, you'll have 40 gallons of ruined batch and a lecture from Master Grub that will make you wish you'd stayed in Somerset and helped with the harvest forever. Right now, the mash sounds right. You lie still for a moment, cataloguing it. Slow, even. The patient sound of yeast converting sugar in the complete dark below you, doing the ancient work it does without anyone directing it or explaining it, or needing to know why it works. All right, get up. The wooden floor of the loft is cold under your bare feet, cold in the way that travels directly through your soles and announces itself in your knees before your brain has fully processed that you're standing. November has got into the edges of the room where the warmth from the copper doesn't reach, and those edges are considerable. You find your stockings by feel, your shirt, the heavy wool waistcoat you bought second-hand from a rag picker in Smithfield 4 months ago. 2 sizes too large, elbows shiny, smells faintly of whoever owned it before you, which is the warmest thing you own, and earns its keep every morning between October and April. Will doesn't stir. He has the gift of sleep that some people carry around like an inherited talent. You've watched him sleep through church bells, through a cartwheel failing 3 feet from the building's wall, through Master Grub's most theatrical arguments with the malthouse supplier about the quality of the last delivery. You go down the loft ladder in the dark. Your feet know the rungs now in a way they absolutely did not 8 months ago. When you tested each one like a man crossing a frozen pond he's not sure is frozen. The brewhouse below is warm. The copper, 4 feet across, sitting over its own brick furnace, glows with the last of its coals, orange and dim, throwing just enough light to see by if you don't need to see very well. The wort finished boiling hours ago. Now it's the mash tun working, the big wooden vessel where malted barley and hot water sit together, doing their slow conversion. You check it by smell first. That's the first thing Will taught you on your second morning. Nose before eyes. If the mash smells sharp and sour, something has gone wrong with the temperature or the timing. If it smells like hot bread and caramel and something faintly, promisingly alcoholic, it smells right. You check the temperature by pressing your palm against the outside of the mash tun, feeling the heat through the oak staves. Too hot and the yeast starts to die, too cold and it stops working altogether. What you want is the warmth that sits just below uncomfortable, the warmth of a living thing working at the right pace, the warmth that means something is happening inside. It feels right, and there, in the complete dark of the brewhouse, before London has properly woken up, before the bells have got their momentum, before the street outside has begun its daily argument with itself, you allow yourself one small private moment of competence. You are learning something real. Master Josiah Grubb appears at the brewhouse door at 5:30, as he does every morning, carrying a tallow candle in one hand and a look of preemptive professional scepticism in the other. He is a broad man. Not tall, you've already passed his height, though you'd never say so, but wide in the way of a man who has spent 20 years lifting things and working his arms and eating food that was cooked in his own kitchen. His face is red-veined and precise simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible, but which his face has apparently decided is its characteristic expression. He has hands the size of paddles, scarred and roughened in the specific places that brewing work roughens hands. The base of the fingers, the heel of the palm, the web of skin between thumb and forefinger where the ladle handle sits. He has a sense of smell that you're increasingly convinced may be supernatural. He can tell from the doorway whether the fermentation is on track. He stands in the doorway for 3 full seconds, breathing the brewhouse air, his eyes closed. You watch him from behind the copper, waiting. "Temperature's good," he says finally. "Not to you exactly. More as a statement of fact offered to the general situation. Yes, sir, I checked it." You checked it. He comes in properly, does his own verification, palm on the mash tun, nose to the fermentation vessel, eyes running over everything with the comprehensive attention of a man who has seen batches ruined by inattention and does not intend to let that happen again. Agnes will be late. You wait. Her boy came round last night. The Aldersgate conduit is running low. Someone's been drawing from the upper pipe without authorization, which means the head pressure is down, which means trickle for everyone below. She'll have to go to the clerk's well instead. He pauses with the expression of a man calculating distances and queue times. By the time she gets there and gets back, it'll be gone 8. We'll need the small beer barrels tapped by 9. Should I go to St. John Street, you ask? The conduit on St. John Street is faster than the clerk's well, and you've been twice. You know the queue. If she's not here by 8, Master Grubb looks at you. Take both yokes. Both yokes means 80 pounds of water across your shoulders on the return trip. Your back makes a preemptive objection. You don't voice it. Yes, sir. Start the morning batch. Use the barrel water from yesterday's delivery. Don't touch the street pump. He's already heading for the door that connects to the tavern side of the building. He stops in the doorframe, doesn't turn around. And don't let the new boy touch the street pump either when he gets up. He goes. You stand in the brewhouse for a moment, listening to the mash. The street pump at the end of the alley is 20 feet away. It draws from a well 16 feet down. The tallow chandler next door has a cesspool 12 feet deep. You learn this in your first week from Will, delivered as a simple statement of operational fact. The pump water is bad. Don't use it. It took you another month, talking to people, listening to the tavern, watching the neighbourhood, to understand exactly what bad means in this context, and another month after that to understand that there is nothing unusual about this. That this is London. That in London, the water you can see and reach and use for free is frequently trying to kill you, and the water that is clean costs money, and the space between these two facts is where a significant portion of the city's daily life takes place. And when I say the street pump is bad, I need you to understand what that means in 1724. This is not a water quality preference. This is not the opinion of a brewer who is fussy about his product. This is a survival instruction, dressed in the language of practical brewing advice. London sits on the Thames. The Thames, in 1724, is not what you would call a river in the clean sense of the word. It is working through what it actually contains at any given moment. A road, a commercial highway, a public sewer, a disposal system for the outputs of every tannery and slaughterhouse and soap works and dye house that the city contains. A final destination for dead animals. A corridor that eventually accepts everything that London no longer wants to look at. The Fleet River, which joins the Thames near Ludgate Circus, runs so thick with everything that has been deposited into it from the streets above that it barely qualifies as a river anymore. It runs underground in places, forced below street level by centuries of building on top of it, but it runs, carrying its load of darkness and accumulated history and contamination toward the main channel, and into the Thames, or into the wells that draw from the same ground, from aquifers that sit in the clay under London streets, slowly and continuously infiltrated from above. The city draws its water. The street pump at the end of Master Grubb's alley draws, from a well, 16 feet. The cesspool next door is 12 feet deep. You don't need to understand hydrogeology to understand why that is a problem. What lives in that water, the invisible architecture of it, the microscopic thing that will take 3 days to get from your stomach to your intestines, and then spend the following week making your body available to the city's undertakers, nobody can name yet. Germ theory is more than 100 years away. The current science, current as in accepted, published, debated in the coffee houses, is the miasma theory. Disease comes from bad air, from the exhalations of putrefying matter, from the smell of the rotting thing, not the rotting thing itself. This is wrong. Mostly, the miasma is not the cause, but the miasma and the cause live in the same places. The water that causes illness and the air that smells terrible often come from the same source, the cesspool, the midden, the backed-up sewer. And so the practical advice, stay away from places that smell like death, is better public health guidance than it sounds, even if the reasoning behind it is incorrect. The street pump smells fine. This is the most dangerous thing about it. The morning batch starts with water, yesterday's delivery water, in the large oak barrel in the corner, brought by Agnes the previous morning from the New River Company's distribution point. Clean water, paid for water, the good stuff. You ladle it into the copper, bucket by bucket. The wooden handle of the ladle is worn smooth in the middle, where hands have gripped it for 20 years, and your hands have found the groove of it. There is something that is almost contentment in that. The way use leaves marks. The way a trade writes itself into the objects it uses. The fire under the copper comes from last night's coals. You learned in your second week that you start a brewhouse fire from the ashes, not from fresh wood, because fresh wood takes too long to catch and a brewer's morning has no patience for it. The coals take the kindling takes the wood takes the copper begins slowly and with the seriousness of a large thing to heat. You measure the malt. This is more tactile than it looks. Good malt is pale, dry, sweet-smelling. It feels light and slightly swollen in your hand, each grain with just the right give when you press it between your fingers. Bad malt is soft and damp and has a sourness at the edge of its smell that the good malt doesn't have. Bad malt will ruin your batch before you've started. Master Grubb's malt comes from a supplier in Hertfordshire, delivered in sacks that weigh more than you do, and which you've been lifting every 3 days for 8 months. Your back has opinions about this that voices during cold mornings. The malt goes into the mash tun, then the hot water, not boiling, not cold, but that particular temperature that you now know by the feel of the steam rising, against your face, Too hot and you destroy the enzymes that convert the starches. Too cold and nothing converts at all. You want the sweet middle, the working temperature, the heat of something alive doing its work. Will appears at 6:30, descending from the loft with the ease of a man who has never once questioned the structural integrity of the ladder. He glances at what you're doing, nods once with the minimal appreciation of a second-year apprentice acknowledging competence he's already expected, and starts on the barrels. The barrels need checking every morning. Small beer barrels for the tavern. The weak stuff, 1 to 2%. What you drink all day while working without it affecting your ability to work. Small beer is what the tap room serves at breakfast. Small beer is what the servants and apprentices and children drink. Anyone who needs to function for the next 8 hours, but also needs to quench a thirst in a city where the water will kill you. Will runs, his hand along the second barrel in the row, and stops. This one's warm. You come over, press your palm where his is. He's right. The wood is noticeably warmer than its neighbours. Fermentation still active. Something in there still converting. Don't tap it, he says. Wait another day. Master Grub will ask. Tell him it's not ready. He'll ask why. You tell him it ran warm. Will shrugs. He's seen it before. It's better than serving something that makes the regulars ill. Making the regulars ill. This is the phrase that everything in this business orbits around. A brewer whose product makes people sick doesn't have a business. A brewer whose small beer gives the taproom the flux will find his taproom empty within a week. And empty taprooms don't pay the rent, and unpaid rent leads to a sequence of events that Master Grub has described once, in detail, with the vividness of a man who has seen it happen to someone else and intends not to let it happen to him. The water matters. The temperature matters. The cleanliness of the vessels matters. Everything. The thing about brewing, and you're still learning the edges of it 8 months in, finding the corners of a craft that has more corners than it appears, is that the whole process is a kind of controlled accident. What you're doing when you make ale is creating conditions where one set of living things, the yeast, can do their work, while preventing the conditions where another set of living things, the various bacteria that will sour and rot and ruin the batch, can do theirs. Nobody in 1724 knows this. The word bacteria does not exist. The concept of microorganisms as actors in disease and fermentation is, roughly, a century and a half away from being understood in any usable way. What brewers know is what generations of trial and error have taught them. The water from this source makes good beer. The water from that source makes bad beer. The mash at this temperature works. At the temperature it doesn't. The fermentation in a clean vessel succeeds. In a dirty vessel it goes wrong. The recipe is correct. The technique is correct. The underlying reason, the microbiology, is completely invisible. But here is the thing, the fact that makes all of this history worth telling. The beer you will produce today, by going through the process exactly as you've been taught, heating the water to mash temperature, boiling the wort with the hops, fermenting in clean sealed vessels, will be, without anyone intending it, without anyone understanding why, safer to drink than almost anything that comes out of a well or a pump within a quarter mile of this brewery. The heat kills the invisible things, not because anyone is trying to kill them, because the process requires heat, because good beer requires hot water, because the boiling of the wort is how you extract the hop bitterness that makes the ale taste right. The public health benefit is an accident of good brewing. That is not a coincidence. That is the whole story. That is why London in 1724, with its 500,000 people and its cesspools and its contaminated wells, is not simply dying of thirst. They're drinking the accident. Agnes arrives at 7:30. You hear her before you see her. The particular shuffle and brace of a water carrier's footsteps, which is not like normal footsteps. It's a controlled gait, a careful distribution of weight that comes from years of walking with 40 or 50 pounds of water suspended from a yoke across your shoulders. You walk differently when you're carrying that weight. You walk like someone who has made a negotiated peace with gravity. Agnes is somewhere between 50 and 60. She has the face of a woman who has spent her entire working life outdoors in English weather, which means it is weathered and decisive, and capable of conveying an extraordinary range of opinion through the set of a jaw alone. She's been carrying water in Clerkenwell for 15 years. Before that, Southwark. Before that, she doesn't talk about. The yoke across her shoulders is worn to the same smoothness as all tools used by one person for long enough. Smooth in the particular places where her shoulders have borne it, polished at the grip points. On each end of the yoke hangs a large sealed wooden tub. Each one holds about 3 gallons. When both are full, Agnes is carrying roughly 50 pounds of water. She does this between 6 and 8 times a day. She sets the tubs down in the brewhouse yard with the efficiency of a woman unloading cargo she has unloaded 1,000 times. Bend at the knees, not the back, lower, straighten, done. Then she stands upright and says, to the yard in general, "Clark's Well." Master Grubb, who has materialized from somewhere in the building, regards her with the expression he keeps for bad news information. How long was the queue? 1:20. She says it without complaint, without the performance of suffering. 1:20 in a queue is simply what happened this morning, in the same category as rain happening in November. A fact. Quality. Agnes tilts her head slightly. This is, you have learned, her version of a measured consideration. Better than Aldersgate this week, not as clean as the Islington Head. Tasted the pipes a bit. The pipes. The New River Company's distribution pipes, which run under London streets from the storage pond at Islington. In many sections these pipes are wooden, bored-out elm logs, fitted end to end, buried in the clay. The elm works well enough. In other sections, particularly the final runs into houses, the pipes are lead. Smaller, more flexible, better at navigating the irregular subterranean chaos of London's underground. Also leaching slowly, continuously, into the water that passes through them. Nobody knows this yet. What people know is that the water sometimes tastes of the pipes, which is mildly unpleasant and seemingly harmless. Certain physicians have noticed that families living nearest the main lead distribution lines, drinking the most piped water, seem prone to a particular kind of colic, a stomach cramping, a lethargy, a slow decline in certain children. The pattern is there. The connection between lead pipes and lead in water has not been made, or not made in any way that reaches the Perkins of the world with their ledgers and their delivery schedules. You don't know this. You know the water tastes slightly of the pipes today, which affects nothing about what you'll do with it. Good enough for the afternoon batch, Master Grubb decides. Agnes is paid. She pockets the coins with the same economy of motion as everything else she does, reloads her empty tubs onto the yoke, and is gone. You watch her go through the yard gate. "She's been doing that since before you were born," Will says beside you. "How far is the Clark's Well? From here? 20 minutes if the streets are clear." He picks up a barrel stave and turns it in his hands, examining it without particular engagement. Which they never are, but say 20 minutes each way, 6 loads a day, that's 12 trips plus the queuing. She's walking for 4-5 hours a day just for this. You think about that, about the 40 minutes of walking, the hour and 20 of standing, for 3 gallons of water at a time for 6 times a day in November. What do people do if they can't pay her, you ask? Will looks at you with the simple economy of someone who has already thought this through. They use the pump, he says. He says it the way you'd say, they eat what's available. A fact about the world as it is organised. It takes you a moment to understand that the pump and the cesspool and the flux that takes Mrs. Cottam from the building opposite for 3 weeks every summer are all the same sentence. The pump is there because Agnes costs money and the pump is free. The pump kills people because Agnes's water doesn't reach everyone. Money, distance, access. The invisible architecture of survival in a city that has grown faster than its infrastructure and is improvising the rest. Around mid-morning, Master Grubb sends you to the new riverhead at Islington. Not for water. Agnes's delivery is enough for the current batches. He sends you with a note for the company's agent concerning next month's supply contract and the matter of a leak in the wooden main on St. John's Lane that has been depositing new river water into the road for 3 days. The water is losing pressure. The deliveries are running shorter than contracted. Someone needs to fix the pipe. You take the note, your coat, and leave. The walk to Islington is about a mile, which in London takes anywhere between 20 minutes and eternity, depending on what the streets decide to do. Today the streets decide to do London things, which is to say they are crowded past the point of comfort, loud past the point of pleasant, and smelling of the particular combination of things that London smells of in November when it's been raining. The gutters on either side of the road run steadily. This is a permanent condition in Clerkenwell. The gutters run with whatever has been emptied into them since the last rain, and rain in London distributes rather than removes the problem, so the gutters are essentially always in motion. This morning's gutter along Leather Lane contains grey wash water from the laundress at number 7, a quantity of potato peelings, something brown of uncertain provenance that you've made a policy of not identifying, and a dead pigeon that has been there since yesterday and is developing an audience of interested flies. You walk the margins, slightly higher ground near the building walls, away from the centre of the street where the drains run and the cartwheels go. This is a skill. Navigating London is a series of small skills assembled over weeks of getting the wrong answer. You know where the loose stone is on the corner of Turnmill Street that will tip and send dirty water up your stocking if you step on it wrong. You know the building on St. John's Lane that has a habit of opening its upper window without warning. You know which dogs will chase and which are performance only. You pass the well on Northampton Road. You don't stop at the well. There's a chain, a wooden bucket, a queue of 6 women with their own buckets waiting their turn. Free water. Right there. No queue longer than 10 minutes. No Agnes to pay. You know why Master Grubb doesn't use it. You know it in the way you know not to touch the hot side of the copper. Not as a theoretical understanding, but as a physical conviction, written into you by 8 months of what you've observed. There's a woman in the building opposite the brewhouse, a widow named Mrs. Cottam, who takes in needlework and has a grey cat, and is universally regarded as a reasonable neighbour. Last July, during a hot spell that turned the whole city slow and sweat-drenched, her usual water delivery was delayed 3 days. She used the street pump. By the end of the first week she was producing, from both ends, the evidence that her intestines had decided to evacuate themselves completely and immediately. By the end of the second week, she was thin and yellow around the eyes, and too weak to lift the cat, and the woman next door had begun making the calculations of a person trying to determine how long until they need to contact the parish. She survived. Not all of them do. You think about Mrs. Cottam as you pass the well. The women waiting at it have no obvious alternative. New River water costs money. Agnes costs money. The conduit on St. John Street costs time. Time is not the same as money, but it is not unrelated to it. When you have children to feed and work to get to, the pump is right here. The pump is free. The water from it looks exactly the same as water from anywhere else. Clear, cold, tasteless. No visible difference between the water that will give you 3 weeks of misery and the water that won't. No colour code, no smell warning, no label. That's the thing. That is the entire thing. You can't see it. The new riverhead sits at the top of a gentle rise north of the city, and when you crest the road and see it for the first time that morning, you feel what you always feel. A complicated mixture of impressiveness and unease that you've never entirely resolved. It's a pond. A large, deliberately rectangular pond cut into the London clay and sealed with puddled clay to make it watertight. About 2 acres, brown at the surface with settled sediment. Surrounded by a low wooden fence that communicates "please don't fall in," without doing much to physically prevent it. And yet this brown pond is the reason that a significant portion of London's middling population, the tradesmen, the craftsmen, the people who have enough income to pay the pipe rent, has water that is measurably better than what comes out of the street wells. The New River is not natural. It was cut by a Welshman named Hugh Middleton in the early part of the century before last. Work begun in 1609 and finished in 1613, which means the channel has been carrying water for 111 years. 38 miles of artificial channel, dug through Hertfordshire, following the contour lines of the land so precisely that the whole thing runs downhill of its own accord, covering 38 miles to travel a straight line distance of 10. Men with spades and wheelbarrows dug 38 miles, following surveyors with instruments, managing the gradient day by day, building aqueducts where the channel needed to cross a valley, lining the clay banks, getting the whole thing to run by gravity alone from the springs at Ware in Hertfordshire to this pond in Islington. It has been working imperfectly, requiring constant maintenance since 1613. The man at the company office is a clerk named Perkins, who has the air of someone who has processed paperwork for so long that he has come to regard all of reality as a variety of paperwork. He takes Master Grubb's note with the expression of a man receiving normal correspondence, which is to say with no expression at all. He reads it. He writes in a ledger. "The pipe on St. John's Lane," he says, not looking up. "It's been reported." 3 days ago, you say carefully. Master Grubb says it's been 3 days. It's been reported. And when can it be fixed? Perkins looks up. His expression is that of a man explaining a simple concept to someone he had hoped wouldn't need it explained. The company has 30 miles of pipe under the streets of London. Wooden pipes buried in clay that freezes in winter and shifts in summer, with cartwheels driving over the road above them every day. The repair gang is scheduled. He holds your gaze for a moment. The repair gang is always scheduled. There is always a pipe to fix. This is entirely reasonable. You accept it. The winter rates apply from the 1st of next month, he adds, producing a printed sheet. Your master should have received notice. You take the sheet and go, but you don't go straight back. You stand outside the new riverhead for a while in the November wind, looking at the pond. The water sits there, brown and apparently still, but you know it's moving. The inlet channel from the north always feeding in, the outlet pipes always drawing from the bottom, a permanent invisible circulation. Water coming from Hertfordshire, arriving here, sitting, settling, and being distributed through the Elm Pipe network under London's streets to the cisterns of the people who pay for it. Then from the cisterns into jugs, into pots, into kettles, then into bodies. It occurs to you, standing on this rise with the city behind you and the pond in front, that the difference between clean water and not in London in 1724 is a matter of money, and money's a matter of luck and circumstance and birth. And luck and circumstance and birth are distributed in no particular order and with no particular justice. Mrs. Cottam doesn't subscribe to the New River Company. She can't afford the quarterly rate. She uses the pump. Master Grubb subscribes. The cost appears in the brewery accounts. The cost is worth it because beer made from bad water is beer that tastes wrong and makes people ill, and beer that makes people ill is a business in terminal decline. The difference between their water is the difference between their incomes, which is the difference between their lives, which is the difference between July as an inconvenience and July as 3 weeks of fever. You fold this thought and walk back toward the city. You go the long way back, not because you need to, because the morning is clear and cold and bright, and because you want to see the river, and you want to see it now, after Agnes and her 60-minute queue, after the street pump and Mrs. Cottam, after the rectangular pond and Perkins and the 30 miles of pipes. You want to look at the thing that is the centre of all of it. You walk south and east until the streets open, and you can see, across the descending rooftops, the grey shimmer of the Thames. You come down to the wharf at Blackfriars, and the smell reaches you before the river does. The smell of the Thames at low tide is not one thing. It is a sequence of things, arranged by depth. The surface smell is rot, vegetable matter, animal matter, something indeterminate enough that your mind decides not to press the question. Below that, salt and grey mud, the particular smell of riverbed exposed to air. Below that, something sulphurous, an exhalation from the disturbed sediment. Underneath all of it, something biological and alive. The smell of a body of water that is not dead but is not healthy. The surface is moving. The tide is pushing upstream today against the freshwater flow, making the characteristic Thames chop that the watermen navigate without needing to think about it. Boats everywhere. This is always true. A lighter loaded with coal from somewhere north. A ferry making the Southwark crossing. A barge with something covered in sacking. And in the water near the wharf, not far from where you're standing, a dead dog. Floating belly up, turning slowly in an eddy. A barrel, one end staved in, its contents blending with the current. A slick on the surface, brown and spreading. That could be several things, and is probably several things simultaneously. The tanneries are upstream, the slaughterhouses, the soap works, the workhouses that deposit their outflow into the fleet, which deposits it here. The great sewer outfalls are upstream too, where the cesspools overflow, which they do, regularly in wet weather, directly into the river, and from this river people draw water, not directly. Even in 1724, drinking from the Thames directly is understood to be unwise, but the engine houses at London Bridge and at York Buildings pump Thames water up into the distribution system. The river water goes through settling tanks, filters through gravel, and then into cisterns, into jugs, into the pot of porridge that gets made at 6 in the morning in 10,000 households south of the New River distribution area. The porridge gets cooked. The cooking involves heat. The vegetables get boiled. The tea water, when people can afford tea, which is becoming more affordable as the century progresses, gets boiled. The boiling, without anyone knowing why, kills the invisible things. The water drunk raw, straight from the well or the pump or the cistern without any heat. That's the water that fills Dr. Finch's records. You stare at the river. Then you turn around and go back to the brewhouse. The lesson comes unexpectedly, as lessons sometimes do. It's a Thursday evening about 2 weeks after your trip to the new Riverhead. The tap room has been full. A good evening, the small beer flowing, the fire well kept, and you're in the back, washing the wooden cups that Master Grubb refuses to replace with pewter on the grounds that pewter is for establishments with pretensions. A man comes through the back door, not the public entrance, through the yard gate and the back passage, which is the way suppliers come in, and people who know the household. He's about 45, thin in the way of a man who thinks more than he eats. His coat is good quality and visibly old. The coat of a man who once had resources and has since redirected them toward other priorities. He's carrying a leather bag and the distracted air of someone who has just remembered an appointment. "Mrs. Grubb about?" he asks. "I'll find her." "Tell her it's Finch." Mrs. Grubb receives the name Finch with an expression that combines resignation and genuine warmth in a ratio that changes depending on what time of night it is. "That's the doctor," she says. "He's come for his supper, again, without having told anyone. Put some bread on." Dr. Bartholomew Finch sits himself at the back table with the ease of a man in familiar territory. He accepts the small beer that's offered without ceremony, without the faint performance of reluctance some educated men put on when accepting hospitality from tradesmen. He drinks it honestly. He is, Mrs. Grubb explains later, her cousin's wife's brother-in-law, or some equally specific and ultimately impenetrable connection. He visits the household periodically. He's the reason there's a printed pamphlet about miasma and clean air on the shelf behind the counter, which you've read twice without quite understanding. He notices you noticing the ale. "You're the new apprentice, Harker." "Yes, sir." "Somerset." "Taunton, sir." "First time in London?" "Yes, sir." He looks at you with the clinical attention of a man whose professional habit is observation. "And how are you finding the water?" The question is specific enough that you blink at it. "We use the New River delivery, sir. Master Grubb is particular." He is. He's right to be. He wraps his hands around his cup, the hands of a physician, long-fingered, slightly ink-stained. "Do you know why?" You wait. This is, you've found, often the correct response to a question from someone who clearly has an answer ready. And here is something that doesn't happen often enough. An adult with knowledge deciding, without particular reason, to share it with a 16-year-old washing cups. He tells you about the water, not the biology. He doesn't have that language. But the pattern. 20 years of practicing medicine in London. 20 years of writing things down, which he does because he is a systematic man, and because something in him suspects that patterns, written down in enough detail, eventually explain themselves. "I keep records," he says. "The parish, the street, the water source, the illness. Not all illnesses, the ones I'm thinking about specifically. The summer flux, the fever that starts in the bowels, the thing that kills children in hot weather and leaves adults bedridden for weeks." He drinks. "Do you know what I find when I look at those records?" You wait. The streets that use the new river, the subscribers, get sick with it less, not never, but measurably less. And the streets using the common wells, the Thames-fed pipes, the street pumps, especially the street pumps, more, particularly in hot weather, particularly after heavy rain. He drums his fingers on the table. After heavy rain, when the ground is saturated, when the cesspools, and every yard in this city has a cesspool, every yard when they overfill and drain sideways through the clay instead of down through the base. He doesn't finish the sentence, he doesn't need to. The miasma theory, you try, says disease comes from bad air, from the smell of putrefying things. He tilts his head. There's something in it. The putrefying matter and the illness live near each other. But I have patients above the worst middens in Bermondsey who never get the summer flux, and patients in clean houses in Bloomsbury who die of it. He shakes his head. The air theory doesn't account for the geography well enough. Why is one street sicker than its neighbour? Why does the flux travel down a row of houses that share a well, but not the row beside them on a different supply? His fingers drum. I don't know what it is. I know what the pattern points to. He looks at you directly. Not the way adults usually look at 16-year-olds, which is primarily to verify that they haven't broken anything. He looks at you like you might actually retain this. Drink the ale, drink the small beer, drink the tea if you have the money for leaves, and you've boiled the water properly first. Drink the coffee if you can tolerate the taste and have the penny. But do not drink the water unless you know where it came from and you trust the source completely. He stands, picks up his bag. Your master makes good small beer, he says, heading for the door. That is a fact with health consequences, though I imagine he'd find it odd to hear it said that way. He goes. You hear him in the next room, talking to Mrs. Grubb about a patient on Cowcross Street. You finish washing the cups. You think about the geography of illness, the pattern pointing to the water. Dr. Finch's records in their ledger, assembling over 20 years the shape of something that has no name yet. And you think about the people at the street pump, the ones filling their jugs in the morning, the choice that isn't really a choice. The gin shops are visible from the brewhouse yard. Not on this street, Master Grubb would object, and does object when the subject arises, though the ability to prevent it on other streets is non-existent. But through the gap between the buildings across the road you can see the sign on the alley beyond, a bunch of dried juniper berries, dark and small, the universal sign. And on warm days the smell of the spirit drifts up from the cellar entrance and announces itself with the specific quality of something chemical and aromatic and slightly wrong. Gin in 1724 is not yet a crisis in the sense of being called one publicly, in print by name. It will become that. Parliament will pass a Gin Act in 1729, and another in 1736, and another after that. None of them will work properly. People will riot. Informers who turn in illegal gin sellers will be beaten in the streets. One informer will be killed by a mob. You're living in the before the crisis is named, when it's just what's happening. We'll took you to a gin cellar in your third week. Saffron Hill. Steps down from the street, low ceiling, plank serving as bar, a woman of indeterminate age selling spirits from a cracked jug into whatever vessel customers brought. The smell in that cellar was a specific compound of things, juniper and something raw and chemical underneath, plus the accumulated exhalation of roughly 15 people at various stages of processing large quantities of cheap spirit in an unventilated underground room. Sweet sour, heavy, a smell that saturated your coat. Of the 15 people in the cellar, 3 were conscious in any meaningful way. Why? You asked Will outside on the street, breathing November air that felt clean by comparison. He shrugged. Cheaper than small beer, gets you where you're going faster. And if your life is... He gestured at the street, the buildings, the general arrangement of things. There's always a reason. There is always a reason. The thing about gin, the terrible, practical, specific thing, is that it solves the water problem. Not well, not safely, but it solves it in a way that is immediately available and costs almost nothing. If you are thirsty and you have a penny and you have no access to clean water, and you know, in the bone-deep way that populations learn things over generations, that the street water makes you ill, then a penny's worth of gin is a solution to thirst. A bad solution. A solution that creates worse problems than the one it addresses, but a solution. Alcohol is a diuretic. It pulls water from your body. You will be thirstier after the gin than before, but you will also be sufficiently changed in your relationship to thirst that this will, for a period of time, seem less important. And gin does not give you the summer flux. Gin kills you in other ways, over years through the liver and the judgment and the incremental destruction of every relationship a person has. But it does not put you in bed for a week in August with a fever that started in your intestines. This is the perverse calculation, the terrible arithmetic of poverty and contaminated water. The flux might kill you in 2 weeks. The gin will kill you in 10 years. People choose the 10 years. People always choose the 10 years when they have to choose. The crisis comes in January, not a great crisis, not the plague. London hasn't had a proper plague since 1665, and the Ashworths on the other side of the brewhouse yard are not going to become a historical event. What happens to them is smaller than that, more ordinary, more representative of the thing that happens all the time, in every neighbourhood, in every season, just usually out of your direct sight. The family in the building next to the yard, a tallow chandler named Ashworth, his wife, and 3 children, all become ill within 2 days of each other. You notice because the youngest child, who's about 4 years old, and has a habit of sitting on the step outside the door and watching the yard with the philosophical attention of a small person who has not yet decided what to make of the world, is not on the step one morning. Then a second morning. Then you hear through the wall the sounds of a house that has gone quiet in the way of illness. Not the lively noise of normal household life, but a muted, rearranged quiet, punctuated by specific sounds you don't want to identify. Mrs. Grubb knows before you do. Living above a tavern in London for 20 years teaches you certain things about the neighbourhood. The Ashworths have the flux, she says one morning, with the tone of a woman communicating 2 things simultaneously, the information and her opinion of the information. Master Grubb stops what he is doing, which is the morning accounts. How bad? All 5 of them. A pause. The children. All 3. He sets the account book down with the care of a man who is managing his own reaction. What are they drinking? Mrs. Grubb's expression answers the question. They use the pump, she says. You know they do. There is a specific quality to Master Grubb's silence. It is the silence of a man who has tried, as a neighbour and occasional benefactor, to communicate to the Ashworths the problem with the pump, who has been thanked and has seen no change, who is now watching the consequences from 20 feet away, through the wall of his yard. Go and see Mrs. Ashworth, he says. Take whatever she needs from the kitchen. If the children are in a bad way, send for Finch, Mrs. Grubb goes. Will appears at your elbow. The Ashworth pump draws from the same aquifer as Tucker's cesspool, he says quietly. It's not a secret. It's a piece of knowledge the whole street shares, the way streets share the knowledge of where the loose paving stone is and which neighbour's dog bites. Has Master Grubb told them? More than once. Will picks up a broom and begins sweeping the yard with the focused attention of someone who needs something to do with their hands. Tucker won't move the cesspool, says it's been there since his grandfather built the house, and he's right that it has. You can't make a man dig out a legal cesspool on his own property. Could they seal the well? Drill it deeper? Deeper. Into what? Will gestures at the tightly packed yard, the buildings compressed against each other. There's nowhere in this city that's far enough from somebody's cesspool. The city grew faster than the infrastructure, and now they're all on top of each other, and nobody knows how to separate them again. He sweeps for a while. The little one, he says, not quite looking at you. The 4-year-old. She was out on the step just last week. Mrs. Grubb gave her a bit of bread. He doesn't say anything else. You both go back to work. Dr. Finch arrives on the second day. He comes through the back gate, his leather bag under one arm, and glances at you in the yard with a slight nod. The nod of a man who remembers a conversation and has incorporated it into his assessment of you. He's with the Ashworths for about an hour. When he comes out, his professional face is in place. The careful, neutral expression that doctors cultivate that keeps the patient from reading the diagnosis in the doctor's face before the doctor has decided how to phrase it. But outside the patient's space, alone in the yard with just you, the professional face relaxes by a degree. How are they, you ask? The parents will be fine. He sets his bag on the workbench inside the brewhouse door. The older 2 children will probably be fine. A pause. The youngest is not good. The cold that comes then has nothing to do with November. She's been drinking the water more than the others, he says. Children drink proportionally more than adults. They're thirstier. They move more. They ask for water throughout the day rather than just at meals. And the water from that pump. He doesn't finish. I've told Mrs. Ashworth. Boil everything. Nothing unboiled for the child. I've sent for oatmeal. Something bland. Something that won't aggravate the bowels while they're trying to recover. Will that be enough? He's quiet for a moment. I don't know, he says. Which is the most frightening thing a doctor can say. It is also the most honest. What causes it, you ask? You're thinking about his records, the geography, the pattern. Something in the water, he says. I've told you what I think. I can't prove it in the way that would convince anyone with the authority to do something about it. I may not live long enough to prove it. He picks up his bag. The miasma theory says it's the smell from Tucker's cesspool. Perhaps they're not entirely wrong, in the sense that the cesspool and the contaminated water are the same problem arriving from different directions. He heads for the gate. Boil the water, he says without turning around. Boil everything you're uncertain about. Drink the ale your master makes. Tell everyone within earshot to do the same. He goes, You stand in the brewhouse. Her name is Alice. You knew her as the child on the step, the philosophical watcher. Now you know her name because Mrs. Grubb came back from next door and said it. Alice Ashworth. She recovers. It takes 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which you hear things through the wall that make the nights difficult. But she recovers. Not all of them do. You know this now in a way you didn't know it before January. Not as a fact about London, but as something that has a step and a face and a name. February is cold and clear, and on a Sunday Will proposes going north. Where, you ask? You'll see, he says, which is his standard answer. You walk north through Islington, past the New River Head. You glance at it as you pass, the brown pond sitting there as always, working invisibly, and up through streets that thin into roads, that thin into something approaching countryside, the buildings spacing out, fields appearing between them, hedges instead of walls. This is unexpected. You hadn't fully believed the city ended. It seems like a thing that would simply continue until it ran out of island. But there is a moment, past Islington, when you walk around a bend and there are fields on both sides and a hill ahead, and the air smells of mud and cold grass instead of coal and sewer. The absence of London smell is remarkable. Highgate Hill is a real hill. Not enormous, but in a landscape that has been flat for an hour's walking, it presents itself with the quiet authority of the best view available. You climb it. Your legs, trained by 8 months of London streets and barrel lifting, find the gradient manageable. Will is slightly out of breath by the top, a fact you record without comment. And then you're at the summit, and then you see it. London spreads below you like a map drawn by someone who wanted you to understand the whole shape of it at once. The Thames organises everything, silver and wide in the winter light, curving through the centre of the view from west to east, vanishing into grey haze at both ends. St. Paul's Dome, Christopher Wren's dome, finished just 20 years ago, rises above everything on the north bank, white stone catching the February sun. To the east, the suggestion of the Tower. To the west, Westminster, and everywhere between, the rooftops of 500,000 lives. The chimneys, hundreds of them, thousands, each one with its thread of smoke, the collective output of all that coal burning creating the grey haze that sits above the city like its own climate. The river is busy even from here. The forest of masts at the Pool of London, where the ocean-going ships anchor. The smaller craft threading between them, carrying everything that the city needs and everything it produces. Will sits down on the frozen grass and produces bread from his coat. He eats it with the serene practicality of someone who planned ahead. You stand at the top and look. The new riverhead is visible if you know where to look for it. The brown rectangle north of the city. The artery. The thing keeping the subscribing part of London alive in a city that would otherwise be killing it with its own thirst. Follow the water. That is what this year has been teaching you, in the way that things teach themselves, not through lectures, but through accumulation. Follow where the water comes from, where it goes, what happens to it on the way, who has access to it, who doesn't. The water from Hertfordshire travels down the New River Channel and sits in that pond and gets distributed through elm pipes and lead pipes to the houses of the people who pay the company. That water makes the ale in Master Grubb's brewhouse. That ale, weak, slightly bitter, thoroughly unpretentious small beer, goes into the tap room and into the neighbourhood and keeps them, without anyone intending it as a public health measure, from dying of what Alice Ashworth almost died of in January. The water from the Thames gets pumped up by the engine houses and sent through a different network to a different clientele, and it is dirtier, and it kills more people, and it is still the best that most of London can access. The water from the wells kills people who have nothing else, and the people who have nothing else drink gin, because gin doesn't put you in bed with fever in January. It just takes something else from you, more slowly, over years. This is the shape of it, the whole geography, visible from up here, drawn in the lines of the river and the streets and the wells and the pipes. "You know what I actually think about," Will says, "when I come up here?" "What?" "How much cleaner it smells." He takes another bite of bread. "Genuinely. That's mostly it." You laugh. You can't help it. He grins. The city smokes below you. The river glitters. The cold February air smells of grass and frost and the distant possibility of spring. You stay until the cold becomes more persuasive than the view. Spring comes, and with it the smell. Nobody warns you about London in summer, not the heat itself, though the heat is considerable, but about the compounding of every London problem in heat. The Thames, which in winter is merely contaminated, becomes in summer a presence, something with texture. The watermen who work it in July develop over years a specific relationship with their olfactory sense that their families describe as, "He doesn't notice the bad smells anymore." The wells get worse in summer. Something about heat and saturation, the cesspools run more freely, the clay conducts differently, means that summer is when people get sick from the water. June, July, August. Dr. Finch's geography of illness is most visible in summer. You watch it now with different eyes. The street pump gets its morning queue of women filling jugs for the day. Some of them will be fine. The contamination comes and goes with rain and temperature and conditions in the cesspool network beneath. Some mornings the water from that pump is acceptable. Some mornings it isn't. You cannot tell the difference. Nobody can. Master Grub's brewery gets busier in summer. More people drinking specifically to avoid drinking water. Small beer consumption increases. Mothers come to the back hatch and buy it by the jug for their children because the children are thirsty in July heat, and small beer is safer and cheaper than ale and fills the gap between thirst and illness. Small beer for children. This strikes you still coming from Somerset as strange, where children drink from the village stream without consequence. The stream where you grew up, the one running along the bottom of the field past your father's house, would have killed a Londoner in August. The difference is the density, the cesspools and their proximity to the wells, the sheer concentration of humanity, and its waste in a space too small to safely contain it. You brew through the summer heat, your shirt wet by 7 in the morning, sweat in your eyes when you lean over the copper. Your arms have learned to do the work without your attention. The ladle, the paddle, the lifting and carrying have become as automatic as walking. Your back has made peace with the barrel sacks grudgingly. Will gets ill in July, not badly, a week of feeling rough, the specific misery of a digestive system in rebellion. He recovers. You don't get ill. You don't know why specifically. You drink what Master Grub's brewery produces. You don't use the pump. Beyond that, the explanation eludes you. Autumn brings rain, and the gutters run extravagantly. The streets become complex navigational problems involving mud, puddles of unknown depth, and the general downhill tendency of everything in London. You learn to carry a stick for puddle testing. One of those puddles, on a dark morning in October, turns out to be genuinely ankle deep, and your left boot is saturated for the rest of the day. The flush of summer illness tapers in October. The cold is, in its way, medicinal. November and frost again, and a familiarity with the cycle that your first November didn't have. The condensation freezing on the inside of the loft window overnight. The water in the washing basin iced over at 5 in the morning. The necessary ritual of cracking it with your fist before your face will be washed. Your first full year in London. Complete. Master Grub marks the occasion with a small gift, a pair of gloves, good leather, butter soft, worth more than anything else you own. He presents them by setting them on the workbench without comment, and then immediately turning to inspect a barrel, which is how Master Grub presents things. "You've done well," he says to the barrel. "Better than most of them. Keep it up." He doesn't say more than that. He doesn't need to. You pick up the gloves. You think about what the future looks like from this room, in this building, on this street, in this city. The years stretching out ahead. More batches, more deliveries, more mornings checking the mash by temperature and smell and the specific sound of the fermentation working. More of Agnes and her yoke. More of Dr. Finch appearing through the back gate with his leather bag and his records. Journeyman in some years. Then, if you're careful and lucky and good enough at it, your own establishment someday. Your own sign. Your own apprentice in the attic, learning to hear the mash in the dark. It seems impossible from here, and has been impossibly close from further away. A new boy arrives in March. Silas from Norfolk, 14 years old. He stands in the brewhouse doorway on his first morning at 5 in the dark with a specific combination of terror and determination you recognize from looking at yourself 8 months ago. He stares at the copper, at the mash tun, at the fermentation vessel, at the barrels, at all of it, arranged in the candlelight, performing its quiet industrial morning. You cross to him. "You'll need to know the temperature by touch," you tell him. "Come here." You show him what Will showed you. Palm on the vessel, the language of heat, what working warmth feels like, what too hot feels like, what cold means. He has good hands, calloused already from farm work, hands that know the grammar of physical labour even if they don't know this particular vocabulary yet. "What's the smell?" he asks. "Fermentation. That's what yeast smells like when it's working." He wrinkles his nose. "You remember wrinkling yours. And the other smell? The deeper one." You consider how to explain the Thames to someone who grew up with Norfolk's clean North Sea air. "That's London," you say. You stop noticing it. He looks uncertain about whether this is a promise or a threat. It's both. But you don't say that. You show him the morning routine instead. The ladle, the fire, the checking, the careful, patient, repetitive work of a brewery at 5 in the morning when the city outside hasn't properly started yet. At one point you stop and say, "Don't use the street pump," he blinks. "Why?" And you tell him. Not everything. Not Dr. Finch's full theory. Not the geography of illness, not cesspools and aquifers and the invisible architecture of contamination. He's 14, and it's 5 in the morning. Because it makes people sick. The barrel water is clean. Always the barrel water, he nods. The nod of a person who doesn't fully understand but believes you. That's enough. For now, that's enough. The weeks after Silas arrives pass in a particular quality of time. The quality that comes when you stop counting days and start measuring in batches. Not hours, batches. The first batch of the week is always Monday's mash. Winter ale, heavier gravity, meant to last. You can tell what day it is by what's in the copper without looking at a calendar. Tuesday is small beer, the quick stuff. Thursday is the porter batch if the hops arrive from Kent as scheduled, which they usually haven't. Friday's cleaning day, every vessel scrubbed with the bristle brush and rinsed twice. Because Master Grub is particular about Fridays, in a way he isn't particular about anything else. You know the week by smell, Monday smells of grain and hot water and the particular sweetness of a mash starting its work. Friday smells of cold water and wood and the faintly medicinal quality of a clean brewery, everything washed and waiting. The year passes in that rhythm, and something else happens that you don't notice happening. You become the person who knows things, not the knowledgeable person, Master Grub is that, but the person who holds the operational knowledge, the person Silas asks when he can't ask the master, the person Agnes addresses when she wants to tell someone about the water quality this morning before reporting to Master Grub formally. The intermediate layer, the person between knowing nothing and knowing everything. You tell Silas about the temperature by touch, and you say it in words that work because you remember the words that didn't work when Will said them to you. You tell him about the pump, each time, not because he forgets, but because the pump is always there and the warning needs to be repeated until it becomes instinct. You teach him to read the mash the way you were taught. Nose first, then hands, then ears. Nose first, always. Silas has a good nose. Better than yours, maybe. He grew up in Norfolk, where the air is clean enough that scent hasn't been deadened by coal smoke and the layered exhalations of a packed city. He can tell the difference between two batches of malt in the same sack, can smell the moment a fermentation starts to go wrong before you can feel it on the vessel wall. Master Grub notices. He doesn't say he notices, but his eyes linger on Silas for an extra second sometimes, with the evaluating quality of a man updating his assessment. Spring comes again, and with it the water problem announcing itself in its annual way. The cold that kept the cesspools slow recedes, and the ground warms, and the contamination begins its seasonal migration. Dr. Finch visits in April, through the back gate as always, accepting the small beer, as always, his leather bag looking more worn than last year. "How are the records?" you ask. He looks at you with mild surprise, the surprise of a man who didn't expect the apprentice to have retained the conversation. "More of the same," he says. "The geography holds. Streets on New River Supply, fewer cases. Streets on well water, more, particularly after the March rains. The March rains saturate the clay. Yes." He regards you with the recalculating expression of someone revising an estimate upward. "You've been thinking about it. I've been watching the streets. I walk the same routes every week. I can see which houses have illness in them by, it sounds strange to say it, by the rhythm of the neighbourhood, by whether there are children on the steps or not." Finch is quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn to observe like that?" You think about it, about Agnes and her yoke, and her weathered face telling you the water quality in a sentence, about Master Grub and his palm on the vessel wall, about Will and his broom and the flat statement about Tucker's cesspool. From people who pay attention because they have to, you say. Finch looks at you. "That," he says, "is more than most physicians manage." He finishes his beer. "I'm expanding the records, cross-referencing water source with season and weather pattern. If the contamination comes from the cesspools through the clay, which I believe it does, the pattern should strengthen after heavy rain." "What will you do with the records?" "Present them to the College of Physicians, to anyone who will read them." His voice carries the particular exhausted patience of a man who has been presenting evidence to people who aren't ready to receive it for a long time. Eventually someone will listen. Probably not while I'm alive, but eventually. He stands. "Keep brewing clean beer, Harker. You're doing more public health work than you know." He goes through the gate. You stand in the yard for a moment, doing more public health work than you know. You think about that on the walk to the St. John Street conduit the next morning, both yokes across your shoulders. Agnes is ill with a spring cold and you've taken her work for the week. The water sloshes in the tubs as you walk and you can feel the weight across your trapezius, the particular pressure of the yoke where it sits between neck and shoulder, the way your walk shifts to accommodate the loaded tubs. 40 minutes each way, an hour if the queue is long. Agnes does this 8 times a day. You understand her better after the first trip than you have in 10 months of working beside her. Summer arrives, and the city makes its annual transformation from complicated to dangerous. The heat turns the gutters active. Things that were solid in December become liquid in July and seek the lowest available point. The lowest available point is usually toward the wells. The wells received this contribution and the contribution is invisible. You learn in July to watch the neighbourhood with Dr. Finch's eyes, the geography of illness, which streets go quiet in summer, which yards have the specific hushed quality of houses where someone is sick, where the water comes from. The pump at the end of the alley is used heavily in hot weather. People are thirstier, children especially. Silas was right about children, and Dr. Finch was right about children, and now you've watched enough Julys to know it with your own eyes. On a hot Thursday you do something you've thought about doing for 6 months. You carry a bucket of clean new river water to Mrs. Birch, who lives 3 doors down from the pump and has 2 children under 5 and uses the pump because she can't afford Agnes and doesn't have time for the conduit queue. You don't explain why. You just bring it. She looks at you with the expression of a woman who is simultaneously grateful and suspicious of the reasons for the gratitude. From the delivery barrel, you say, "We had extra." You don't have extra. But Master Grubb, when you ask him about it later, simply looks at the accounts book for a long moment and then says, "Do it on Mondays and Thursdays. Keep the bucket clean." And that's how it happens. Not through legislation or science or public health reform. Through a bucket, carried twice a week by an apprentice brewer on a Clerkenwell street for reasons that neither he nor his master fully articulates. Mrs. Birch's children do not get the summer flux that year. You don't know if it's the water. You can't know. The sample size is 1 family over 1 summer, and Dr. Finch would tell you that's not enough to conclude anything, but something in you files it away anyway. The pattern, the bucket, the 2 children still running around in September. The taproom settles in the evenings, the working day done, the barrels tapped, the fire well kept, the room filling with the particular people who fill it every evening. The cordwainer, whose knees ache from crouching over his last all day, the journeyman printer with permanent ink on the heel of his right hand, the coal heaver who smells of his work without apology, the tallow chandler who sometimes is the Ashworth's father, recovered now, 4 months past January. His colour returned. They drink small beer mostly. The ale costs more, and most of them are watching what they spend. The evenings are slow and comfortable in the way of rooms where tired people are warm and the drink is honest. They talk about the price of coal going up again, about a dispute between neighbours 2 streets over, about the King's health, about the cart that blocked the road for 4 hours last Tuesday, about everything, and sometimes, in that easy evening way, about the water. Heard the kettles on Cowcross had a bad week. What pump are they on? Tucker's line. The sound of universal understanding. Tucker's line. Everybody on the street knows Tucker's cesspool. What does Tucker say? What Tucker always says. His land, his cesspool, been there 40 years. the comfortable silence of a conversation that has exhausted itself many times and retains its shape from habit. "Drink up," someone says, not as a toast, as a statement of practical philosophy. You pour the next round. Your hands know the motion, the tap handle, the flow, the level, the moment to stop. You're doing the thing that is keeping them safe, though no one in this room is thinking about it that way. They're just thinking about being warm and tired and wanting something to drink before bed. Between the street pump and the people who might drink from it, there's nothing. No barrier, no warning, no visible indication of danger. But between this brewery and this tap room and the people who spend their evenings here instead of at the gin cellar on the alley, between that choice and its consequences, there is the process, the copper, the fire, the careful management of temperature over time. The barrel water from Agnes's clean delivery, uninstructed, accidental, but real. In September, Master Grubb sends you on an errand that takes you past Jonathan's coffee house on Exchange Alley, and for the second time in your life you stop in a doorway and look at something and feel the specific sensation of a piece of the world that you haven't properly understood until this moment. The errand is to a paper merchant 2 streets over. Nothing complicated, just collecting a receipt that needs to come back signed. Master Grubb trusts you with the simple administrative things now. He has graduated you, without saying so, to the category of people who can be trusted to find their way to a paper merchant and back without requiring supervision. It's a grey September morning, the kind that London does regularly. Not cold enough for discomfort, not warm enough for comfort. The air that specific shade of damp that isn't quite rain but isn't not rain. Exchange Alley smells of coffee. Not the way a house smells of coffee when someone has brewed a cup. The alley smells of coffee the way the brew house smells of malt. Completely, pervasively. A smell that has been applied to the walls and the floorboards and the very mortar over many years until the building itself is approximately 30% coffee by molecular composition. The door of Jonathan's is open. You stop. You've been to a coffee house once before, a smaller one near Smithfield with Will on a slow afternoon 8 months into your first year. That one smelled of tobacco more than coffee, and the newspapers were 3 days old. You drank nothing and left when a man started an argument about the South Sea Company with such intensity that it seemed possible it might become something other than an argument. Jonathan's is different in the way that everything on Exchange Alley is different. Denser, louder, more intensely itself. You step in. The warmth hits you before anything else. A good warmth. Fire and bodies and the specific radiating heat of a room in continuous heavy use. Every table occupied, the air thick with tobacco smoke and conversation, and the smell of coffee being made continuously at the back. Your eyes take a moment to adjust. Every table is full. Men in coats of varying quality, some good enough that you can price the fabric at a glance. Master Grubb has trained this into you. It happens automatically now. Some worn to translucency at the elbows. They're talking, all of them simultaneously. The specific coffee house noise that is not the noise of a tavern. Lower, more constant, more focused. A tavern at this hour would have a looser quality. The sound of men relaxing. This sounds like men working. A newspaper changes hands between 2 tables without anyone breaking their conversation. In the corner, a man is writing rapidly in a small notebook while listening to someone across from him with the expression of a person trying to record more than the pen can manage. You find a space at the edge of the room and stand there, not ordering, not intending to order. Coffee costs more than you want to spend on a Tuesday morning. And simply watch. The serving boy brings cups to a table near you. The cups are small, ceramic, glazed, chipped at one rim. The coffee is black and smells like the alley concentrated to an essence. You've had coffee once, at a stall near Cheapside, from a woman who poured it from a dented tin pot and charged a halfpenny. It tasted like burned wood dissolved in hot water. You didn't understand the appeal. The man at the table nearest you receives his cup and wraps both hands around it with the particular quality of a man receiving something he's been looking forward to for the last 40 minutes. He closes his eyes for 1 second, just one, as the heat moves through his palms. Then he opens his eyes and goes back to his conversation. The price won't hold through December if the Portuguese... I don't care what the Portuguese do. I care what the Amsterdam Exchange... Hull, I'm telling you. It came in at Hull, not Bristol, and the whole cargo. You listen to these fragments and feel the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of a world that runs by rules you're only partly learning. Then you think about the coffee, and the coffee connects in the way that things has been connecting for you since Dr. Finch's conversation to everything else. The coffee's made with boiling water. You know this, you've watched it made. The grounds go into the pot, the boiling water goes over them, the pot sits over the heat. Then the liquid is poured. Boiling water. The same mechanism, the same invisible process, the heat that kills the thing that has no name yet. A coffee house is, without intending to be, without anyone designing it as such, a place where Londoners who cannot afford New River Water subscriptions and will not pay Agnes for deliveries can come and, for a penny, consume liquid that has been made with water hot enough to make it safe. The newspaper, the conversation, the warmth, the tobacco. And underneath all of that is the structural reason this gathering place is not inadvertently sickening its regular customers, the boiling water. You stand there and you understand something that nobody in this room is thinking about, because why would they? Because you don't think about the reason hot coffee doesn't kill you. You just drink the coffee. A man at the far table coughs, long and productive. He takes a handkerchief, good linen, you note, and deals with the situation, and then puts the handkerchief away and continues his conversation without breaking stride. This is London. You don't break stride for coughing. Coughing is ambient. The boy at the corner table closes his notebook and opens a newspaper instead, spreading it on the table with the ceremony of a person about to do something important. He is, you estimate, perhaps 20. Ink on his hands, compositor or clerk. He reads with the focus of someone who is reading professionally, not for pleasure, marking certain passages with the small pencil. A journalist, maybe. There are dozens of newspapers now. The Daily Current, the Post Boy, the Flying Post, the Spectator in its earlier iteration. The coffee houses are where they're read, and where the stories in them are generated. Men talking, the journalist in the corner recording, the next morning's edition taking shape in real time around the tables. The coffee house as information infrastructure, as the place where news moves, as the place where, you realise this slowly, standing at the edge of the room, Londoners who cannot otherwise afford to subscribe to a newspaper can come and read 3 different ones for the price of a cup. 1 penny. Information, safe liquid, warmth. It is the most efficient penny available in London in 1724. You think about the people who don't have a penny, about the penny that buys gin instead, about the gin seller off Saffron Hill and the woman slumped on the steps and the choice that isn't a choice, between thirst and the pump, between the pump and the penny, between the penny and what the penny buys. A voice near you. You ordering, son? The boy with the serving tray is looking at you with the polite but unambiguous expression of someone whose job is to convert occupants of floor space into paying customers. Just going, you say. He nods, turns away before you finish the sentence. He's seen people come in to look and leave without ordering. He'll see it again today. It's part of the trade. You go back into Exchange Alley. The coffee smell follows you for half a street. You get the receipt signed and go back to the brew house. That evening over supper, you tell Master Grub what you were thinking. He listens with the quality of a man who is chewing and processing two things simultaneously. The boiling water, you say. In the coffee house, same as here, same as the brewery. He sets his spoon down. You're telling me, he says slowly, that Jonathan's coffee house is a public health institution. I'm telling you they're using the same mechanism without knowing it. Master Grub regards you with the specific expression he reserves for ideas that he finds interesting but hasn't verified yet. Finch put this in your head. Finch gave me the pattern. I followed it. Mrs. Grubb at the other end of the table says nothing. She is a woman who processes information through a long internal consideration before it becomes speech. Sometimes the speech comes the next morning. Silas is eating with the focused efficiency of a 14-year-old who's been lifting barrels all day. Master Grubb picks up his spoon again. The coffee houses, he says, have been in this city for 70 years. The first one opened in, he frowns, 52, I think, somewhere around there, St. Michael's Alley. Saint, 17 years of boiling water, you say, before anyone understood why it mattered. He eats for a while. The question, he says finally, is what you do with this. What do you mean? You can observe a pattern, or you can use a pattern. He's not looking at you. He's looking at the middle distance the way he does when he's genuinely thinking rather than performing thinking. Finch is observing, writing it down, hoping someone reads it eventually. And us? We've been using it since before either of us was born. He finishes his beer, sets the cup down with the deliberate precision of a man making a point. Every batch we brew, every delivery Agnes makes every morning Silas doesn't use the pump. He looks at you finally. We're not observing the pattern, we're the pattern. He stands. Supper is over. Next time you go to Jonathan's, he says, heading for the door, buy yourself a cup, put it on the house accounts, a pause, and tell them it was medicinal. He goes. You sit at the table and think about being the pattern. The room empties by 9. The last customer, the cordwainer, nods at you at the door. Not words. The nod, which means acknowledgement, which is at the end of a long day its own kind of sufficiency. You clear the tables, the wooden cups back to the washing, the benches pushed into position, the fire banked for morning. You go upstairs. Silas is already asleep, curled away from the cold edge of the attic, breathing with the deep, uncomplicated rhythm of pure physical exhaustion. Will is sitting up, reading by the last of his candle, turning pages with one hand while the other is wrapped around the cool remains of his evening cup. "Good night?" he asks. "Quiet," you say. "Quiet's good." You sit on the edge of your pallet. The city outside is what it is at this hour. Lower, not silent, never silent, but lower in frequency. A cart in the middle distance. Somewhere a dog making its argument with the night. The watchman, whose call you've stopped consciously hearing because hearing it means nothing, requires your attention. You think about the water. You can't help it. You live in a business that is about water, at its root, every day. The water that comes in from Agnes's yoke, handled with the care of something precious. The water that goes into the copper and gets heated and transformed into something the neighbourhood can safely consume. The water that doesn't come in, the pump water, the Thames water. The water that travels through lead pipes and picks up its slow, invisible cargo. You think about Dr. Finch and his records in their ledger. 20 years of the geography of illness, assembled in the language of parish and street and water source, pointing at something that has no name yet but that will eventually have a name. John Snow will name it in 1854 with a map and a contaminated pump on Broad Street in Soho, and Parliament will finally act on it, slowly, painfully, over the next decades. You won't see 1854. Nobody in this room will, but the pattern will be there, waiting to be named. You think about Agnes walking her 40-minute circuit, about Master Grubb paying for the good water because the bad water makes bad beer, about Dr. Finch drumming his fingers on the table because the evidence is in the records and the science to explain it doesn't exist yet. All of them doing the invisible work. Agnes with her yoke and her queue. Master Grubb with his subscription and his standards. Dr. Finch with his ledger. The city drinking its ale and its small beer and its boiled tea and its London coffee. Surviving the summer by accident and knowledge and the practical conviction of people who have watched enough neighbours get sick to know the shape of the danger, even without the language for it. Outside the city settles. The watchman calls the hour somewhere. 11. His voice has been doing this since before you were born and will continue after you're gone. The gin shops are still open. They're always open at 11. The cellar off Saffron Hill and 100 like it. Their customers in various stages of the evening's project. Their floors covered with straw for the ones who have arrived at their destination. Tomorrow Agnes will walk to the Clark's Well or the Islington Head or the Aldersgate conduit depending on what the pressure is in the morning. She'll arrive at 7:30 with her yoke and her tubs and the neutral weather report tone she brings to water quality. She'll say, New Riverhead today, clean as it gets, or Aldersgate running better, and set the tubs down with the practised efficiency of 15 years, and the fire will go under the copper, and the water will heat, and the invisible thing in the cold well water, the thing that put Alice Ashworth in bed for 3 weeks, will be killed in the heating, and the ale will be made, and the small beer will be tapped, and Silas will stand in the doorway at 5 a.m. with his eyes wide, and his nose wrinkling, and his hands not yet knowing what they're going to learn. And you will tell him, palm on the vessel, feel for the warmth. Don't use the pump, the candle in the loft burns down. Will closes his book. The light reduces to almost nothing. The orange memory of a wick, then dark. Your body is doing its inventory of the day. The ache in your shoulders from the morning lifting. The slight roughness in your throat from the brewhouse heat and the coal smoke air. The tiredness in your hands. Specifically in the left one, where the heel of your palm is building the hard pad of callus that wasn't there when you arrived from Somerset. Your hands are learning the trade. That's what the physical change means. The roughness where they were smooth. The muscle in your forearms that is new. The knowledge in your palms that knows the temperature of a mash tun in the dark. That knows the weight of a full barrel from the partial resistance when you try to move it. You're becoming something. You can feel it happening, the way you can feel the yeast working in the mash. You can't see it, but the temperature is right and the sound is right, and something is definitely converting. Somewhere below, The copper holds the warmth of today's batch. The city outside does its nighttime thing. Lower, not quiet, operating at the frequency of 11 o'clock in November in a city that does not fully sleep. You think about the view from Highgate, the whole shape of it, the river organising everything, the dome of St. Paul's catching the winter light, the ships and the smoke and the endless rooftops of 500,000 lives. And underneath all of it, under the rooftops and the streets and the lives being lived in them, the invisible infrastructure, the elm pipes carrying the new river water through the clay, the lead pipes in their final runs to the subscribing houses, the wells drawing from aquifers infiltrated from above, the cesspools draining through, the clay in wet weather carrying their cargo toward the nearest water table. The architecture of survival, built from necessity, maintained by economics, navigated daily by Agnes and Master Grubb and Dr. Finch, and every water carrier and every housewife and every child who knows, without being able to explain it, that some water is safe and some isn't, and the difference is invisible. Centuries will pass. The London you know will become something that you would not recognise on your most imaginative day. The Thames will be tamed. Joseph Basil Jett will build his great intercepting sewers in the 1860s, after the summer of 1858, when the smell from the river becomes so catastrophic that Parliament barely functions, when the curtains in the houses of Westminster are soaked in lime chloride to let the members breathe. And finally, London's sewage and London's water supply will be separated by engineering on a scale that would strike the Perkins of the New River Company as impossible. The street pumps will be studied. John Snow will draw his map in Soho in 1854, every cholera death marked as a dot, the dots clustering around a pump on Broad Street in a pattern so clear that the parish board will finally reluctantly remove the handle. The epidemic will end. The pattern that Dr. Finch has been assembling in his private ledger will have its name at last. The New River will stop operating entirely in 1946, 330 years of carrying water from Hertfordshire, and then the modern infrastructure will replace it. The Channel will become a walking path. The pond at Islington will be built over. Agnes's route will become a route to somewhere entirely different. The gin shops will close eventually, not quickly, not for decades, not without politics and economics and riots and several more failed acts of parliament, but they will close. And clean water, safe water, tested water, water that doesn't contain the invisible thing that killed Mrs. Cottam's summer and Alice Ashworth's January, as will come out of taps in every house for almost nothing. But that is not now. That is later. That is the long labour of generations of people who saw the pattern that Dr. Finch is seeing and committed their lives to making the pattern change. Right now, in November 1724, in the loft above the brewhouse on St. John's Lane in Clerkenwell, the best available solution to the problem of water in London is a barrel of New River Company delivery, handled carefully, heated in a copper, and consumed as small beer by people who don't necessarily know why it's safer, but who know that it is, in the deep practical way that people know things that have kept them alive. Some things don't change. The need for someone to do the invisible work doesn't change. The work of keeping the clean thing clean, of knowing where the water comes from and what it passed through, of paying the extra cost, doing the longer walk, maintaining the standard even when the cheaper option is right there. Agnes knows it. Master Grubb knows it. Dr. Finch is learning the shape of it in his ledger, 20 years of patterns, patient and precise. The human need for water doesn't change. The human need for rest at the end of a long day carrying something heavy, that doesn't change either. Let sleep come the way it came to Thomas Harker in his attic room in November 1724. Let the brewhouse warmth rising through the floorboards do what it does every night. Settle into the room, fill in the cold corners, make the blanket enough. Let the sounds of the city fade to the frequency they reach at 11 o'clock when you're genuinely tired. The watchman, the distant dog, the life of the tavern 3 streets over muffled to a murmur. Let the mash work below you without your attention. It knows what it's doing. Let your hands relax, the palms that know the temperature by touch, the fingers that have learned the weight and the work of this trade. Let the long day's labour settle into your bones and do what labour does when you've earned the rest. Go still, go quiet, stop requiring anything from you. You are warm enough, you're fed enough, you're safe enough. You have clean water and honest ale and a trade that is writing itself into your body day by day. You have Agnes's knowledge and Master Grubb's standards and Dr. Finch's carefully assembled pattern. You have a city that is trying to keep you alive, imperfectly, accidentally with the tools it has. That's more than most things, that's enough. Let the questions you can't answer yet go soft at the edges. They'll have answers eventually. Not in your lifetime mostly, but eventually. Let the sound of the fermentation work below you, that slow, patient, biological ticking, the yeast converting in the dark, doing its invisible good, become the rhythm that carries you under. Let the city breathe, you breathe, and then nothing. Just the long, slow drift, just the warmth rising. From the copper, just rest. Good night.